Hi guys, so I've been getting so many questions about how to study vocabulary, so I decided to make a video sharing some tips for Korean learners. And of course, the specific method that works the best is different for everyone, but there are two common elements behind everything I'm going to share, and it all comes down to repetition and retrieval practice. So without these, it's very natural that we forget the words we learn. So although different methods work for different people, I'll be sharing the methods that personally help me the most and also seeing what worked best for my students. So feel free to adapt them to your own preferences and take whatever works for you. So I'll take you through each level from absolute beginner all the way to intermediate. And even if a certain level isn't where you are right now, I recommend watching the tips for every stage because each level builds on the previous one. So let's start with absolute beginners. So if you've just learned Hangul, I recommend starting with basic vocabulary or simple phrases rather than jumping straight into grammar or immersion. And at this stage, using a simple vocabulary list is completely fine because many beginner words like 사과, 침대, 집, 고양이, 음식 don't really require much context. So even if you don't yet understand sentence structure, these are the words you can still acquire without learning them in context or full sentences. And there are so many free beginner vocab lists you can find online, and you can even use books with pictures and audio or YouTube videos like this that you can play the words on repeat. And whatever list of words you choose, I recommend starting with nouns rather than verbs or adjectives. And this is because verbs and adjectives involve conjugation rules and some other grammatical explanations. So it's better to start learning verbs and adjectives after you've covered some basic grammar. But if you just learned Hangul, nouns are a much more manageable place to start. And if you think about it, if you visit a certain country and you're speaking in their broken target language, nouns are often the most useful because with nouns, you can name what you need or want, the actual things. So in terms of like both practicality and how easier it is, nouns are a great starting point. But then the question is, how do you actually get these words into your long-term memory? So you can apply the two key principles I mentioned, repetition and retrieval. So starting with repetition, the best approach is to choose the routine that lets you be regularly exposed to Korean words. And the easier it is for you to stick with, the better. So for me personally, I tend to prefer more traditional study methods mixed with using multiple senses. So what I do is I set a daily target for how many words I want to learn, and I usually study with books. So I first use the audio file from the book to check the pronunciation of each word, and then I write those words on my note card. So on one side, I write the word in the target language, and on the back of it, I write its meaning, and I also say them out loud as I write. So this way, I'm actively engaging my brain by listening to the words, writing out the words, speaking out the words, and also seeing the words with my eyes at the same time. And because I'm using multiple senses, it helps the words stick much better. And I also carry these handwritten cards with me and review them during 자투리 시간, like when I'm waiting for the elevator or waiting for food at a restaurant. And when I don't have my notes, I would listen to the same audio files I use for studying vocabulary. And just by listening to the words, I naturally review the words and get exposed to the words I've already studied. And another simple method is putting post-it notes on objects around you. And these are the things that you see in your daily life, so it creates natural exposure and repetition. So the key is consistency. Even if it's just 10 minutes a day, make sure you set aside time to actively study or at least expose yourself to the words. So that part is repetition, and just as important is practice recalling words, also known as retrieval practice. And I've always felt that retrieval is very effective in learning, but I couldn't really explain it in logical or scientific way. But recently, I read a book called uncommon sense teaching, and here they explain the power of retrieval with scientific and neuroscience-based evidence. So trust me on this, guys. If you've been doing a lot of repetition but not much retrieval, that's probably why the words haven't been sticking in your memory. And once you start incorporating retrieval practice, you will really notice a difference. And just like repetition, there are many different ways to practice retrieval or recall. So for example, with note cards like this, you can first try to recall the meaning of the target language and then check the back to see if you got it right. And for another example, if you save it on an app like Quizlet, it lets you do simple quizzes so you can practice recalling using these features. And another simple way to practice recall is in your daily life. For example, when you're eating with a spoon, you go, "What was spoon in Korean?" "Oh, 숟가락." Or when you read a book, you do the same. "I know what this is. 책." So you're associating the actual things you encounter in real life with the words you learned. And if you're not able to recall every word, that's completely fine. What matters is the attempt. So if you can't remember something, just check back your word list or look it up in a dictionary and you can go, "Oh, right, that's what it was." And then you move on. And as you repeat this process, it will naturally accumulate over time. And if you're using a textbook, make sure to take advantage of the quizzes they provide, because quizzes are designed to help you retrieve what you learned, not just cram information, right? So solving quizzes are also a great also a great retrieval practice. So the key for retrieval practice is not to just passively review the words, but to actively bring them back to mind. So even if you only learn 5 words a day, consistently practicing retrieval is far more effective than memorizing 50 words a day and never trying to recall them. And this is optional, but if certain words are particularly hard to remember, you can try creating your own mnemonics or even little songs. I personally don't prefer mnemonics because then I have to remember the mnemonic and the word, so it feels like double the effort for me. But if a mnemonic naturally comes to you, definitely use it. So for example, one of my students used to mix up coffee and cafe, and she would always say cafe for coffee because for her, cafe intuitively felt more like coffee because it sounds like caffeine. So she came up with her own mnemonic. So whenever she thought of coffee, she would first think of cup, right? And then imagine P, which means blood, inside it. So coffee is coffee, blood inside cup or whatever, right? And that's how she eventually got used to associating coffee with copy. So it doesn't matter if it sounds a little weird to other people. If it works for you, then it works. So if there is a word you find particularly hard to remember, try creating your own personal mnemonic like this. Or you can also create your personalized story surrounding that word. And the key is to make it feel natural to you. Once you're able to associate a good number of Korean words with their meanings, you're now ready to move beyond basic vocabulary and into more complex parts of the language. For beginner stage, I'll divide it into 2 groups. So the first group is for learners who don't like to study vocabulary necessarily, and the second group is for learners who are willing to have their own vocab study routine. So let's start with the first group. So once you become more familiar with basic vocabulary, you can now gradually move into grammar and immersion-based learning. And as you do that, you'll naturally be exposed to many new words along with the words you're already familiar with. And realistically, trying to record and memorize every single new word you come across can feel very overwhelming, and honestly, it's quite bothersome too. So it's actually okay not to do separate vocabulary study, as long as, this is important, as long as you're consistently exposed to Korean in some way. So if you are a beginner, you're likely using beginner level materials, right? It could be grammar books, podcasts, class classes, whatever it is, within those beginner level materials, certain words will naturally repeat. So you'll come across a word and think, oh, I saw this yesterday. What did it mean again? Then you remember it, or maybe you don't. If you don't, you can look it up in the dictionary and then you move on. And you see it the next day, you remember it, or you don't. So over time, those repeated exposures will help the word settle into your memory. But as I mentioned earlier, there's one important condition for this. You need to have consistent exposure to Korean in some way. And that could be through classes or through comprehensible input and immersion practice. And if you find it difficult to regularly immerse yourself in Korean, or if you don't want to spend time searching for immersion materials every time, I recommend using a platform like LingQ, which is also a sponsor of today's video. If you already consume a lot of Korean content, such as podcasts, K-dramas, K-pop, or even books, LingQ can be a perfect tool for you. So to show you how LingQ works, I'll use a podcast by Korean Sol as an example. So once you import the MP3 file, LingQ brings everything in for you automatically, like this. And while you're listening, you can not only follow along with the script, but you can also click on unfamiliar words and phrases to instantly check their meanings. And this way, you're getting maximum input of vocabulary while you're practicing listening. And the words you check are automatically stored, and later you can review them with quizzes. You can also switch to view sentence mode if you want to study sentence by sentence and also check the accurate translation of each sentence. And LingQ also works with YouTube and Netflix content as long as Korean subtitles are available. So for example, on Netflix, if you set the subtitles to Korean and import them as a lesson, LingQ brings in the entire script. And here's a method that I recommend for studying with movies. So first, just watch the movie. You can just relax while watching it the first time, and you can also have the subtitles on in your native language. And then you watch the movie again while studying with the script on LingQ. And you don't have to study the entire movie. You can also just pick your favorite scenes and focus on those parts. That works totally fine too. And then you watch the third time without subtitles this time, and you'll find that you understand so many more words than the first time. And if you are a K-pop fan, I'm sure you've heard about BTS comeback. So LingQ has recently added a new feature for BTS fans where you can now watch BTS clips from YouTube and look up words instantly. This feature is only available on Android right now, but it'll soon be released for desktop and iOS. So as you can see, LingQ lets you immerse yourself in reading and listening material that you actually enjoy, and this makes it such a useful tool for building your vocabulary. Now, let's get back to our video. And for those of you who find it difficult to get regular exposure to Korean, it's important to have your own vocabulary-focused study routine. And like I mentioned, for absolute beginners, you can still use apps, note cards, post-its, and whatnot. But once you move past that stage where you study word for word, I personally recommend adding these two methods. So the first one is studying with a vocab-focused book, and the second one is learning vocabulary through reading material. So for the first method, there's not much to explain. So if you're someone like me who feels more comfortable and mentally organized when studying from a well-structured book, then you can simply find a vocabulary book that clicks with you the most. So for example, I have this book called Korean Made Easy Vocabulary by Seung-eun Oh, and it has a wide range of beginner-level vocabulary that you can use in everyday situations. And after you study, you can choose to save these words that you learn in a notebook or an app and practice them using spaced repetition. But finishing the book from start to finish is already meaningful in and of itself, so that part is totally up to you. And another method I also highly recommend is learning vocabulary through reading materials. So for this, you can use real Korean books like children's storybooks, but at a beginner stage, it's actually better to use reading materials specifically designed for Korean learners. And there are many textbooks and apps that help you with reading, but if you're lost on which one to choose, I personally recommend starting with topic test reading questions, even if you're not planning to take this particular test. And the reason why reading is so effective effective for vocabulary learning is because you learn words in context. So up until the absolute beginner stage, it's okay to learn words without much context. But at some point, learning words in isolation starts to feel a bit bland and they just don't stick as well. And with reading, you're not just looking at single sentences, you're also working with full passages made up of multiple sentences, right? And you're not just reading passively, you're also solving questions. That's important because now you have an immediate goal, getting the answer right. And that really helps with your focus and attention. And that's why I strongly recommend studying vocabs with reading materials, and topic test sheet is a really great resource you can use. So you can either get a topic practice book like this one, or you can also download the actual topic exams for free on this particular website. And as you read, you'll see a mix of both familiar and unfamiliar words. For the words you already know, that's great. You're getting exposure and you're also practicing retrieval with the familiar words. And for unfamiliar words, you don't have to look up every single one, and you can just focus on the words that actually prevent you from understanding the passage or answering the question. So you can look them up using something like Naver Dictionary or even ChatGPT and write them down underneath. This way, you're getting both exposure and retrieval while also learning new vocabulary at the same time. So that's like killing 3 birds with 1 stone. And then you move on to the next passage and repeat the same process. And you can also feel free to use listening questions in the same way. When you listen, you're still hearing words, so it can definitely work as a vocabulary study material. But the reason I strongly recommend reading for studying vocabulary specifically is because reading gives you more control. You can slow down, reread, and really take time to think about what a word means. And this kind of deeper engagement helps you remember words much better. So overall, using topic materials or any kind of reading material is a very effective and practical way to improve your vocabulary. So everything I talked about for absolute beginners and beginners also applies to intermediate learners. So repetition / consistent exposure to words and retrieval, and also the importance of reading. So they are what I call 3 R's. But of course, from the intermediate level on, you will be dealing with more upper level vocabulary and a much larger volume of words. And because of that, retaining vocabulary can feel more challenging and it takes more time. So there's actually one new thing that I do recommend you start at this level, and that is learning Hanja, the Chinese characters. So around 60 to 70% of Korean vocabulary is derived from Hanja, and these Hanja-based words are called Sino-Korean words. And of course, the percentage of Sino-Korean words is lower in everyday conversation, maybe to around 30 to 50%, but even so, learning Hanja gives you a clear advantage because it helps you understand the root meaning behind words. So we actually see the same concept in English. So for example, the prefix re means again, right? So it helps you intuitively understand words like repeat, replicate, and rehearse. And in the same way, once you understand Hanja root, it becomes much easier to learn words like 제 방문, which means revisit. It comes from this Hanja, which means again, and also 재생, which means regeneration. So if you say 피부 재생, it means regeneration of skin. And it also becomes easier to tell apart like similar looking words. Like for example, 자연 means nature. This 자 comes from this Hanja, which means oneself, and 연 comes from Hanja that means to be like that way. So it means it's like that in and of itself. So that's nature. And 재연, which looks similar, but they come from different Hanja. This 재 uses the same 재 from 재방문, so it means to re, and 연 means acting in theatrical terms. So it's like reenactment of something. So that makes it much easier to distinguish 자연 and 재연, right? And over time, with accumulated Hanja knowledge like this, you'll start to notice patterns, and words that once felt random will begin to connect through shared roots and meanings. So how you can study Hanja is you don't necessarily need to memorize how to write each Chinese character perfectly. Just being able to recognize the Korean reading of a certain character and its core meaning is enough. So for example, this Chinese character means water, but you don't have to be able to write it perfectly. But knowing that this Hanja is read as 수 in Korean and that it means water, that alone is enough. And this way, it'll be much easier to process words like 정수기, 수건, and 수영. They have something to do with water, so it'll be much easier for you to memorize them. And aside from vocabulary, at the intermediate level, I think it's very common for intermediate learners to hit a plateau. Not just with vocabulary, but across many areas, it can start to feel harder to move on to the next level, and you feel kind of stuck. And my personal take for intermediate learners is that if you've made it this far to intermediate level, plateau usually doesn't happen because you don't know how to study or you can't find the right materials. More often, it's something psychological or environmental. And once you get past that plateau, it really opens the door to the next level and you start to feel meaningful progress again. So I'll talk about overcoming plateaus in language learning in the next videos. And I think that would be something more fundamentally helpful for intermediate learners than just sharing more vocab tips. So please look forward to that. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. 화이팅 여러분! 화이팅!